There's no sound in hunting quite like it. And yet a lot of hunters seem to be hearing it less and less each spring. Many turkey hunters in the southeast are reporting lower turkey numbers. And right now, the National Wild Turkey Federation, which is the largest group dedicated to turkey conservation, is in the heart of rebranding. Their goal is to appeal to new and younger members. But at the very same time, a brand new turkey hunting organization has cropped up, and it's looking to promote the most old school tactics and ethics of turkey hunting. Our hunting editor, Andrew McKean, has been reporting on turkey conservation and critter groups dedicated to wild turkeys, and he's here this week to give us a lay of the land. All right, Andrew, so back in January 2020, you wrote a series of stories about how citizen conservation, which is largely driven by groups like Pheasants Forever, Ducks Unlimited, how that sort of conservation effort needed to change in order to be effective into the future. And one of the groups at the center of this series was the National Wild Turkey Federation. Right now, the Federation is in the middle of a rebranding. Can you explain what's going on with the NWTF?
I use the NWTF as kind of the poster child for the evolution of conservation groups, mostly because they have been so tightly focused on their mission. I mean, it's in their name. And their mission had been really the restoration of wild turkeys across America. And they did an awesome job of that. But when that mission was largely fulfilled, I think they struggled to redefine their mission a little bit.
What are they actually rebranding to? And what will members of the NWTF kind of see in their day-to-day?
Well, I'm going to answer that partly as an outsider because I really haven't been involved in the WTF for a number of years. But what I see is this. There is a real worry that the National Wild Turkey Federation appeals to such a small percentage of the nation's turkey hunters. They told me something like only 3% of licensed turkey hunters are members of the NWTF. So they want to change that. They want to increase the percentage of turkey hunters who are members of the group. And so I think that's behind a lot of the changes that you're seeing. They're sanding down the rough edges. They're changing from all caps NWTF to lowercase because I think that'll be more accessible to a younger demographic. They're making their color palette much more sort of organic and naturalistic. So it's appealing to people who like the outdoors in general, maybe not just turkey hunters. So yeah, they're trying to open the gate a little bit wider so it doesn't seem like it's the exclusive domain of just hunters or just old southern white hunters. They really want it to represent the rest of America and increasingly a younger, more diverse demographic they want to have as members of the NWTF.
Got it. But their mission overall of just what their organization is trying to do, that really isn't changing, is it?
Hasn't changed at all. In fact, one of the things that they have left intact is the wording of their mission, which is dedicated to the conservation of the wild turkey and the hunting heritage. And if you ask them, they say they're not backing away from that a bit. But in order to achieve that mission delivery, they've got to have people pushing on the wheel. They need to increase their membership in order to do that.
We're not out to recreate our mission. We love our mission. We're all about the wild turkey and the preservation of hunting heritage. That's never going to change.
Jason Burkhalter is the NWTF's Chief Information Officer.
So we want to appeal to more turkey hunters. We want to bring more turkey hunters in the fold. That is our first and foremost goal.
And why does this, NWTF mission and kind of rebranding, why does this matter so much for turkey hunters right now in this moment?
Yeah, it's right to bring it back to turkeys and to turkey hunters because all is not well in turkey country. In big parts of America, turkey numbers have been declining, and it's been going on for probably longer than we've really been articulating it or been aware of it. But turkey numbers have been decreasing, not increasing. And a lot of people are genuinely worried about kind of where this ends. And I think it's fair to say some are wondering if the NWTF is up to this task.
Okay, so let's just kind of talk timeline a little bit. So say in the 80s, NWTF is really just about getting turkeys on the landscape. That effort goes on for years and is successful. There's turkeys all over now. Turkey hunting in a lot of states up by me in Wisconsin and Minnesota is exceptional. Over that time, as the turkey population is healthy and has grown, NWTF kind of evolves its mission a little bit. So it's about, recruiting new hunters and, maybe different aspects of turkey hunting along with the conservation elements. But now there's like maybe a little trouble in turkey country, and people are like, hey, what about the conservation side? Is that a fair way to sum it up?
You know, like a lot of things, the answer is shades of gray. You know, so I'll say in one sense, the NWTF probably got maybe too much credit for the restoration of the turkey. They put a lot of turkeys in boxes and moved turkeys into new habitats. In fact, I was actually a volunteer for the Turkey Federation when a lot of that was going on in Montana, and there's nothing that's more fulfilling to a volunteer than letting a turkey out of a box into new habitat. They did that really well.
I gotta tell you, it's one of the greatest feelings ever.
This is an NWTF volunteer, John Larson, during a turkey release in Arizona.
Be able to be a part of something where we know our work is going to go towards putting some turkeys in a spot where they'll be able to breed and better establish themselves and be a part of the conservation effort is something special.
But, you know, one of the dynamics of biology is that critters thrive in new habitats for a couple of generations. And so I think some of the plateauing of populations was pretty organic. I mean, they filled up the available populations. And probably a lot of us and a lot of the NWTF volunteers remember that sort of like the high tide of the 1990s, early 2000s when there were turkeys everywhere. That's not unlike what you're seeing now. You're still sort of in that rising tide zone of turkey restoration. But what tends to happen is after the turkey habitat is filled, populations aren't as dynamic anymore. You'll start to see predators starting to constrain the populations that they've now learned how to prey on. You'll have habitats that maybe are getting a little bit old and decadent, and so they're just not as productive anymore. So some of that decline is organic. Other things, we're seeing this in the American Southeast right now. You've got, in some ways, a perfect storm of feral hogs are really invading the Alabama and the Mississippi Delta country. You've got these fire ants all over the place that, you know, if they're not apex predators, they're stressing young animals because they're having to fight off biting critters so much that they're not in great shape. You've got all sorts of invasives. You've got changing agricultural practices. You've got a changing climate. I mean, all of these things are contributing to a world that's really not the same as it was 30 and 40 years ago when the NWTF was in its restoration heyday.
And the NWTF is based in the Southeast, right? And the Southeast, to people who are really plugged into like turkey hunting culture, just feels like the homeland of turkey hunting in America. Why is that? Oh,
it is. And in the story, I actually called it the buckle of the gobbler belt.
Yeah.
I mean, it is the crucible of turkey hunting in America. And I'd say for a couple of reasons. One, they've been doing it longer than the rest of America. And in a lot of places, turkeys never actually disappeared from the Southeast. They may have been hunted down to really small levels, but there's an intact turkey culture that goes back more human generations than a lot of the rest of America has. And two, I think there's a deep reverence for tradition and culture, and turkeys are such a part of that, sort of the deep woods, bottomland turkeys, the black belt of Alabama turkeys, and a lot of the giants of turkey hunting came out of that tradition.
If you'll accept my calculations for these things, there were not any more than 1,500 spring turkey hunters in the entire world at the beginning of 1960.
Got Tom Kelly, whose book, The 10th Legion, is really the foundational book about turkey hunting culture.
I knew that there were not, and none of the stuff that you saw that anybody had done about turkey hunting was, in my opinion, worth a damn. It was a bunch of guys who were hunters, but they had taken other kind of hunting and just turned it into a turkey hunt, and none of it rang true at all.
We've got, these pretty iconic brands like Mossy Oak and Real Tree and Primos are all in the Southeast, and all were really built on the shoulders of turkeys and turkey hunters.
Hello, I'm Wilbur Primos. If you're a veteran turkey hunter or just a beginner, you know how hard it can be to get that turkey into shotgun range. The calling you're going to hear is excited calling, most of it, and we're going to talk about that a little bit later.
So as this kind of conversation develops in the Southeast about, turkey numbers, and the NWTF is kind of going through its rebranding or its evolution, it starts to feel like there's a little bit of like a generational struggle in all of turkey hunting, but I think that's also going on in the NWTF. And to me, that became really clear when the NWTF launched its new logo. So can you talk about like what's up with the logo and why this matters?
Oh boy. So it's easy to dismiss the logo brouhaha as being kind of small and puny. But I don't think it is, because a logo is a symbol, and in some ways you can pour whatever you want into symbolism. And that's what's happening right now with this logo. So yeah, the NWTF spent a couple of years really researching and figuring out its brand expression. And as you said, it's an attempt to remain relevant to existing members, but also to recruit a whole new generation of conservationists. I would say the logo operation is kind of an outreach or outcome of that. I'm sure we'll have renditions of the logo somewhere where listeners can look at, but there was an iconic flying turkey over North America that was kind of the symbol of the NWTF during that restoration era. And it did symbolize this larger-than-life turkey flying over the continent. We're going to put turkeys everywhere. That was then replaced maybe 20 years ago with this 3 walking turkeys. Some of the deriders of that said it looked like they were walking backwards, kind of air walking, a la Michael Jackson-ish. But that was also, for a lot of members of the NWTF, that was the icon of the organization. And so it's always risky to change that up. But the folks at NWTF said they wanted to refresh it, make it more accessible to people who might not have ever heard of the NWTF or might think it's like some sort of a hunting club. So that's the idea of it. And just search NWTF logo on Facebook and get a flavor of some of the derision that's been heaped on this thing. So in some ways, it is a stand-in for other feelings you might have about the organization. This is just sort of a cheap shot because it's so visible. But on the other side, I think it does represent a little bit of a departure from the NWTF, maybe being the old guard that got us here, really reverence for the past, and now looking to the future, like the organization's sort of livelihood is going to be with this new generation. And I think that's hard for people who have been involved with this for a long time.
You very eloquently talked about the logo without describing it, so I will do it very quickly, so you don't have to. But the logo is essentially a gobbler's head with 2 kind of arrows that look like turkey feet, kind of pointing at it. I think the thing that most people have kind of said it looks like is a seahorse with wings. But, that's for everyone to decide what they want to see. And that's the thing about a logo. I think one of the more compelling things about this NWTF story is the fact that there's a new turkey group out there. And this group, my understanding, is based in Alabama. Can you tell us about it? Like, what's their story?
Yeah. It's called Turkeys for Tomorrow, and it's based in Alabama. It's definitely a core Southeast United States group, although they aspire to be much bigger than that. They want to be a national group. It's founded by a bunch of really hardcore, very traditional turkey hunters from the southeastern hunting tradition. And I actually interviewed the co-founder, this guy named Ron Jolly, who was really clear. He's like, we are not in competition with the NWTF. We are our own entity. We may have similar missions in terms of making sure that turkey populations are healthy.
We decided up front that we didn't want to be perceived as a threat to anybody. We wanted to help. So if you told me that we would have the amount of support 4 months in that we have right now, I wouldn't have believed you. What also we want to do is to be advocates, an advocacy group for turkey hunters. Turkey hunters are passionate. They're willing to put skin in the game.
While the NWTF has robust membership and a banquet structure, Turkeys for Tomorrow doesn't want its hierarchy to be built the same way. I'm really not sure how they're going to fund themselves going forward, but their mission is really looking at sort of on the ground. They want to fund research that looks into reasons for this decline of turkeys. They want to work with state game agencies to basically restrict harvest. They're pretty worried that hunters are actually part of that equation. We talked about all the other things, those sort of environmental factors, but the founders of Turkeys for Tomorrow also think that we hunters ourselves have been doing too efficient a job of killing turkeys in a lot of places. And in some ways, they probably have some basis for that. There's 5 turkey limits in a lot of states in the South and really long seasons. Some of the initial research that's going on looking at turkey declines is suggesting that those early gobbling turkeys, sort of those dominant males, especially on heavily hunted ground, are getting killed early in the season. So there may not actually be reproductively successful gobblers. There's just jakes left in some of these areas. There may be some sort of bottleneck in terms of reproduction. So one way to address that is reduce turkey harvest and maybe change the season structure a little bit. So they're pretty active in that initiative right now.
I think it's a perfect storm. The evolution of the sport, we've gotten so much better at killing them, and the equipment's better, the knowledge is better, the access may be a little more limited than it was back in the day. But turkey hunting is no longer go sit down by a tree and yelp 3 times and hope one comes. It's evolved to a sport of, it's more about the killing.
We'll be right back after the break. When you say, kind of reduced hunter harvest, you're talking about some like hunting tactics, right? Not just season length. So things like reaping turkeys, hunting out of blinds, using ultra realistic decoys. I'm guessing that this group is kind of opposing those things.
They are, which is kind of interesting. I mean, they definitely are hardcore hunters, and they would tell you that they are 100% for hunting. But they, in some ways, want us to be less effective, and they would like they'd like some of our tactics to change, to kind of go back in time, so that it's more of a one-on-one kind of woodsmanship-focused hunt rather than decoys and ground blinds and the reaping tactic.
But these guys, I know I'm not criticizing anybody who buys a license or does it, within the realm of the law. I'm saying that there's some things that, for instance, Alabama addressed. There's no more reaping in Alabama. No decoys the first 10 days. All those things make it a lot easier. Pop up blinds with a spread of decoys that go sit on the point and, right turkey walk out 200 yards, he's going to come join the flock. Boom, he's dead. That's not the culture that old group of guys and gals sitting around that table grew up the way, that's not how turkey hunting was. The romance is gone of it.
He thinks the cumulative effect of that has been that we hunters are a little too effective, so let's back off and exercise a little bit more restraint until turkey numbers come back.
Gotcha. And would you consider this group, this Turkeys for Tomorrow group, is this like a rival now to the NWTF?
That's a really good question. I mean, the world of turkey conservation isn't that big, and to have 2 groups, it's kind of hard to have a separation between the 2. But if I had to draw a bright line between the 2, I would say that the Turkeys for Tomorrow is more focused on the ground, on learning why turkey numbers are declining, and working with state agencies, like I was saying, to restrict harvest and restore more of that restraint and those kind of traditional hunting traditions. I would say the NWTF is more focused on the bigger picture, on building this bigger community, building membership, building a bigger community of advocates, and affecting turkey conservation really at a higher level with policies and with funding definitely to state agencies and researchers, but really more at that upper level rather than on the ground in that black dirt of the Southeast.
We need to maintain relevancy and grow market share. We took a look at our member numbers. We took a look at our demographics and said, goodness, if we continue at this pace of aging out to nearly 1.5 years every year on our average member, we'll simply won't exist. That's no good for anybody involved.
Okay, so, I'm not a biologist, not even close. But my understanding of turkey management is that it really relies on quality habitat. So are either of these groups really poised to take on this, challenge and improve habitat on a large scale?
I think it's too early to say if Turkeys for Tomorrow can handle that at this point. They're definitely kind of a scrappy upstart. I would say that that's one of their goals, But I would say the NWTF has done a very good job of positioning itself to do that very thing, to affect habitat on a landscape scale. As I mentioned, they work with farm bill programs to make sure there's conservation values that are applied. If somebody is working with the farm bill and the various programs, everything from CRP to woodland hardwood management, they've actually done, I think, a really impressive job of being the organization that is devoted to, I'm going to say, hardwood and upland conservation in much of turkey country, not unlike the way that Pheasants Forever has done that same job in the Northern Plains and in pheasant and grouse country.
All right, let's rewind. Let's go back to that series that you wrote in 2020. This was like just before the coronavirus pandemic. And one of the things you suggested in that series was that the main model for fundraising for these critter groups probably needs to evolve. Could you kind of explain how that fundraising model works, and then what you were kind of seeing post-pandemic, if anything, has changed when it comes to fundraising for these critter groups?
Sure. It's important to note that series came out like a month before the world stopped with the pandemic. And so, some of the things I was pointing out in that, I think actually came true or were maybe proven to be true quicker because of the pandemic, showed some of, I think, the structural flaws in the critter group organizational structure and fundraising structure. But what that structure really is a membership-driven way to raise funds that's built around, these fundraising banquets. I'm sure everybody's familiar with them. Every local town has got some sort of critter group, whether it's Ducks Unlimited or Rocky Mountain Elk Foundation, and their grassroots expression is these annual fundraising banquets. You come to a church hall or a community center, and for your price of admission, you get a membership to the group, and you get a prime rib dinner, and then you get a chance to play raffles for guns. And I've been a part of many of these, so I can put on a raffle, in just about anywhere and raise a few bucks for a critter. But that's really been the way it has been done. My critique of it in that series was that so much of the mechanism for these critter groups was built around fundraising, not mission delivery. And I think it was kind of an empty promise for a lot of the membership. It was coming to these banquets and really funding this with the expectation that all of their money being raised, or at least much of the money being raised, was going to be put in the field on the ground for conservation, when the reality of it is a lot of that is used to pay regional directors and this fundraising team and to kind of keep the lights on in these in buildings, not necessarily on that mission delivery. And what I was really asking the critter groups to do is reevaluate how they raise and spend their money to be more efficient and ensure that more of the money is put on the ground.
When that series ran, very shortly after, you took some pretty serious heat for some of the stuff in there, and I know that because I took a little bit of it too. Have you seen any changes among these critter groups throughout the pandemic and after, either in the ways that they're fundraising or in the ways that they're executing on their missions?
Yeah, and I don't pretend that it was a response to our series. I think it was really the response to the pandemic, which, really exposed some of the flaws of that idea of getting together with a bunch of your aging hunting buddies in a church basement and having this fellowship. And so I think, though, that banquet model has been successful for 40 or 50 years, and there's nothing to take away from it because it has been a really good engine. What I was noticing a little bit before we kind of go to how the changes have been manifested is increasingly people were just really not interested in going to a banquet and raising money that way. And I think that's especially true of a younger generation, this younger generation that critter groups are really trying to capture and get involved in citizen-based conservation. So happily, largely because of the pandemic, a lot of conservation groups are going to social media and they're going to kind of more spontaneous fundraising. I'll use the Mule Deer Foundation as an example where I help them out a little bit. There's these Beers for Deers fundraisers, which are, they're kind of happy hours that happen to have a bunch of gun raffles. Those were easier to execute during pandemic because there wouldn't be quite as many people and they could kind of manage some of the physical space for it. But think you're starting to see more online sweepstakes. You're starting to see more kind of virtual fundraising. So I'm happy about that because the overhead to deliver that, to raise the dollars, is lower. So more of that funding can then go to mission delivery. But if I'm being honest, I'm also a little sad about it because there's such kind of magic about the fellowship of being in a banquet hall, egging on your buddy or making fun of him when he wins that gun raffle or doesn't win the gun raffle. And there's an energy in the room that I think is really important as kind of the basis for a lot of why we get involved in conservation. It's because we like the people who are also involved in conservation.
Yeah, I mean, you are talking from personal experience here. I mean, you helped head up a chapter in your hometown of Glasgow, right? How did that evolve and play out over time? How did that experience go with NWTF?
Yeah, it's a good topic to cover because I think it starts to talk a little bit about where I see some of the soft spots with national conservation. So, yeah, I was a long-time volunteer for the NWTF. I started a local chapter, and then I was the state chapter president. And when I moved to Glasgow, 20 years ago or more, we started a chapter in Glasgow, a Turkey Federation chapter. We called ourselves the Highline Gobblers. And for 10 years, we had a kick-ass banquet. We raised a lot of money. And then we sent it away. And certainly some came back, and we definitely moved some turkeys. But there was, an increasing concern on the committee of our chapter that, boy, we had a lot of local conservation needs that were not being fulfilled. Why didn't we put more money towards local needs? And I think that's one of the problems with national conservation is, a lot of times that money does come back to local communities, but not always. And so you've got to really believe in that bigger mission to keep that fundraising flame alive. And, we were a pretty good example of that, where we started to kind of question that bigger mission. And, geez, is it really worth, devoting all of this energy and time to sending money to support turkey conservation elsewhere? And so we quit ourselves of the Turkey Federation and then started kind of out of the ashes this hyper-local group. We call ourselves Highline Sportsmen. We still have a kick-ass banquet, but we put all the money back on the ground in our local community. And it's just another way of doing fundraising. But in that series, I actually talked a little bit about my own evolution this way. And one of the things I noted, and I think it's true now as ever, it's really hard to sustain that local interest. One of the things that the national groups bring is this bigger sense of purpose and this bigger scale. It's really hard to do with just local volunteers. And so I think there's room for both, but I am a huge proponent of the national conservation movement and critter groups as long as they can keep their mission pretty sharp.
One of the kind of, I don't know, I guess it's surprising to me, but maybe it's actually an old argument, is that we have enough hunters. Why are these critter organizations worried about recruiting new hunters? Too much of their time is spent on building community. Why don't these critter groups just focus strictly on habitat? Like, let's just get as much habitat and as much hunter access and as many animals on the landscape as possible, and hunter numbers will take care of themselves. What do you think about that?
Well, I think there's two ways to answer it. One is that social part of who we are and our kind of willingness to join in fellowship or sistership or just, I don't think that's a small thing. But the bigger question is kind of a chicken and egg question, is you need to have that critical mass of people doing something in common to raise the money to then pay for the habitat work. The habitat work is not going to come for free, and it's not going to come without being asked. And so you really have to have that advocacy group to demand it and to raise money for it and to ensure that it happens. But without that habitat, after a while, you're going to lose the interest in the people and the people who are advocating it and working so hard for it. So, to me, it's like this double helix where they have to go hand in hand and they sustain each other. And when one of them gets out of whack, which I kind of think is happening right now with this discussion that we're having, when one gets out of whack, you start to question the strength of the whole unit.
Yeah. And this is a very roundabout way of asking this, but it kind of makes sense then that there is a big national group that kind of focuses on community and the larger issues. And then there are some regional groups that are really worried about how many turkeys we have on the ground where we hunt right now.
Yeah, and I think that's the greatest reason or explanation for the rise of turkeys for tomorrow. And, if I was betting, I would say It's not the last group you're going to see come out of the grassroots. You know, we saw the same thing with ducks. Louisiana duck hunters were concerned about some of the national policies of Ducks Unlimited and kind of started their own, upstart group down there. And so I think that's actually a really positive thing. It's evidence that the citizen conservation model is working, that people are going to find a way to raise their voice, raise some money, and address local problems. And if the national problems can be addressed at the same time, I think that the tide rises all those boats. And it's a good thing for conservation in general.
The center of the whole branding effort was appealing to a broader range of individuals. And in appealing to them, not changing the course of who we are, the fabric of who we are, but simply telling them through all mediums what we do.
The Outdoor Life podcast is edited and produced by Senior Deputy Editor Natalie Krebs, and it's hosted by me, Editor-in-Chief Alex Robinson. Reporting in this episode is Buyer Hunting Editor Andrew McKean.